Peace, love, and law. For the next few minutes, I will be reading from this book right here. So if you're interested in learning a little bit about common law, stick around. If not, see you on the other video. Now, this book is here. This book here is called The Origins of the Common Law by Arthur R. Hogue. Hogue, Hogue. So I'm just going to read a little bit for a few minutes, and hopefully to maybe encourage you or entice you into buying this or reading it for yourself. So I'm going to start off at chapter 1, second paragraph. Chapter 1 talks about the introductions, social change, and the growth of the common law. So I'm going to start here where it says, Englishmen in the Middle Ages accepted, as they do now, the need for rules governing such recurring relations as those between buyer and seller, landlord and tenant, guardian and ward, creditor and debtor. That one's an interesting one. Rules of common law touch through a farmer's property rights in a crop of wheat planted in a rented field, or the right to use a public roadway. Nor is the common law a stranger in the marketplace. The fishmongers as well as the banker may invoke its protection. Anybody can use the common law. Anybody can invoke it, is what it's saying. So the bond then between law and society is close and intimate. The history of the common law is a matter of fact and rests ultimately on the relationships of people who have taken their differences before the court for settlement. And it will be assumed in all of the discussion which follows that the common law has grown, now rapidly, now reluctantly, to keep pace with changes in the social order, from which again it is inseparable. So it's basically common law is trying to keep up with all the changes that is happening in society. So social change and legal change are more easily discerned than accounted for. And the process by which legal changes are made is often far from clear. The mystery surrounding many legal changes may be particularly baffling when we deal with a system of judge-made law. For who can determine with precision and thought of medieval royal judges as they built up a body of principles in case after case, decision after decision? It is difficult enough to grasp the nature of the judicial process in the present when we have full reports of trials and the opinions as well as the decisions of judges. Even so, there is value in an account of the common law during its foundation years, when its principles were not overlaid by a vast burden of statutory legislation designed for the complexity of modern life. An account of the common law in medieval England will bring us close to many, if not all, of the elements which must be considered in dealing with the law in any period. Here we shall touch on substantive rules and rules of procedures, as well as on courts of justice and agencies of enforcement. You hear that? Courts of justice and agencies of enforcement. Oh yeah, that happens in every court. Now we got to learn what those things mean. What it's talking about? It's two separate things, right? Moreover, in the medieval period, we shall find excellent examples of legal change accompanying social change. Men of the 12th century and the 13th century knew both the vigor and the decline of feudalism. In these centuries, population increased rapidly and agriculture flourished in each epoch of good markets and rising prices. English merchants traded with Lombards from Italy, Hansards from Germany, and wool merchants who supplied the looms of Flanders. I have no idea what those things are. Oxford and Cambridge University trace their histories back to the 13th century, when builders were at work on such English Gothic cathedrals as those at Salisbury, and Wales. Some people are saying that's all Tartarian. That's a whole other subject, though. England, the 13th century, was a society of rapid change. The greater a man's knowledge of the law, the more hesitant he will be in answering the question, what is common law? But we need a working definition here, and perhaps we can distinguish the common law in the 12th and 13th century from other legal systems by calling it simply the body of rules prescribing social conduct and justiciable in the royal courts of England. Justiciable? Although this definition is admittedly general, it is difficult to be more precise. We should remember that the law enforced in royal courts and common to all the realms of England was in competition with concurrent rules enforced in other courts. Say when a matter of freehold was at issue, Englishmen were not compelled to present their cause before the king's court. Men were free to take their cases into the local courts of the counties, which administered local customary law. Men might seek justice from the church court administrating rules of canon law, which touched many matters, especially those related to wills and testaments, marriage and divorces, and contracts involving a pledge of faith. Feudal barons might accept jurisdiction of a baronial overlord whose court applied rules of feudalism custom. Townsmen might bring their causes before the court of a borough, which would judge them by rules of the law merchant. Isn't that interesting? Damn, that's weird. All these courts and all these systems of law derive mention in an account of growth of the common law. For by the end of the 13th century, the common law had absorbed much, if not all, of the judicial business of its competitors and may have borrowed heavily from them in the process of aggrandizement. The medieval common law, then, was not local or practical. We should distinguish it from whatever smacks of specialty. And this is some weird words, just throw shit in there. Smacks of specialty. What is that? Smacks of specialty. It is not to be identified with rules of law administered by local baronial and manorial courts, or by ecclesiastical courts, or by borough courts. Borough courts. Borough. Borough. Courts. Okay, some of the difficulties confronting the uninitiated in understanding medieval common law undoubtedly stem from insistence on applying modern definitions to the medieval materials. For example, modern usage tends to distinguish common law from written law or statutory legislation. Again, the modern lawyer, as well as the layman, may think of the common law as a body of principles embodied in or derived from precedents. The decisions of certain courts in England and other common law countries. So common law is basically case law. To add to the misunderstanding of medieval common law, there is the occasional modern effort at defining the common law as a body of rules based upon custom alone. Makes sense. That's why they count commons for the common people. The things that they commonly do. The most common conduct of people. That's the common law. That makes a lot of sense. Walter Ullman has recently provided a statement clarifying the medieval concept of common law while discussing lex terrae. a much debated phrase appearing in chapter 39 of Magna Carta. He observes, we may justifiably call the lex terrea, the early 13th century, truly expression of the common law, taken in the sense of the concept. Taking in this sense, the concept loses a good deal of its vagueness and refers to ordinance, rules, decisions of the court, in short, to that body of legal rules which had its roots deep in the soil of native feudalism, notably the land law. Hence, the land law and the law of the succession, personal property, and tenure were the earliest developed laws, and which derived its binding character from the explicit or implicit consent of the feudal tenants in chief, precisely because no distinction was as yet possible between legislation and judicial actions. Any rules which was considered binding derived its force in the contemporary feudal environs from the consent of the barons and the king of his feudal capacity. Anyway, so that's it for now. Just want to read that. But I'll be reading a little bit more on this. There's some other good information right here. That's just the beginning, right? This continues into the language of the common law, which I'll make another video, I guess. It's pretty cool. But for now, that's all. Again, it is Bing Bam Boom, Origins of the Common Law by Arthur R. Hogue. I think it's Hogue. Peace, love, and law. Take care.